Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning is Yoma Samach Aleph. Chodesh Tov to everyone. Before we start, I just want to mention that the siyum is already planned. The date went out on Facebook. We're going to have two different types of siyums this time. In Israel, we're going to have siyums in different locations. So for those of you in Israel, you can join a siyum in different locations around the country to be published soon. And in English, then most of those will be in Hebrew. I assume maybe one or two will end up in English, but probably mostly in Hebrew. And in English, we'll be doing our regular Zoom for everybody abroad and in Israel. And that will be, so the siyumim around the country will be on the 8th and the 9th. We actually finish Yoma on the 8th. So it'll be the 8th and the 9th, Thursday night, Friday. And the Zoom one is going to be on Sunday. To keep it on Sunday as it's easier for people abroad to make it to a siyum on Sunday. Hopefully, I'm sure not for everyone it's easier, but for some people, for most people. So it'll be on Sunday, the July 11th. So we hope you'll all join us for some part of it, whatever works for you. You can join both parts if you live in Israel or you're visiting. You know, some people are visiting them, which would be nice to see people. You'll all be invited to any siyum that works for you in any location. Okay, we're going to start now, Yoma Daf Samach Aleph. We'll start with our dedications. We have some for the month. The month of Tammuz is sponsored by Rabbi Freda Cohen and Eric Nussbaum in memory of Freda's beloved father, Mitchell Cohen, Michael Ben Shraga Feivel Halevi, whose 27th yahrzeit falls on the 16th of Tammuz. He was so kind, sweet, and funny. He had a big open heart for Klal Yisrael, V'chol Yoshvei Tevel. He would never have categorized himself as a Talmud or a Torah or Talmud scholar, but indeed he was. The father of three girls, he gave all of us a Jewish education, a loving husband who adored our mom. There was no one I missed more on the day I received smicha as he was my inspiration and my ballast. He would be delighted to know that he has 9 grandchildren, 2 of whom carry his name and 2 great-grandchildren. He was truly an ish ne'eman. The month is also dedicated for Refuah Shlema of Pesha Etel Bat Sarah. Today's daf is sponsored by Alana Friedman in memory of her dear cousin, Devorah Ita Bat Harab Azriel Ze'ev on her yahrzeit. Devorah was a brilliant woman with a strong sense of justice and integrity who loved to learn and would have been my biggest daf cheerleader. She is loved and missed. May she be a Militzat Yosher for her family and women everywhere dedicated to Torah learning. Okay, with that, we're going to get started. So the first thing to note is that we ended with this question where Rabbi Hanina said this halacha about the Ktoret, about the order. If you do something out of order, you do the Ktoret out of order, lo asava lo klum, and you have to start from the beginning. And then we said, but wait, maybe that doesn't work with Rabbi Yehuda. And then we said, well, it could work with Rabbi Yehuda. And then the Gemara said, but the Mishnah doesn't sound that way because the Mishnah didn't say, it said when you messed up the timing, it didn't say go back and redo the Ktoret. It just said go back and redo the sprinkling of the blood. So, right, it said, Ad shelo gamar matanot shebifnim, right? If you didn't finish the matanot shebifnim and the blood spills, remember, you have to start again. But where do you start? From the beginning of the sprinklings of the blood. It doesn't say, which means you have to go slaughter another animal. Which is if you slaughter another animal, you're supposed to do the Torah after. It didn't say that in the Mishnah. To which the Gemara answers, B'Torah lo kamayim. It just wasn't dealing with the Torah. You can look at the sheet for today. I put up at the top of the sheet a chart about what the right order is, what happens in Mishpach Adam, and what the Mishnah says about it, and what parts the Mishnah is missing. We're going to do the same thing now with Ula. Amar Ula. Again, Ula is going to say a halacha, and then we're going to try to work it in with the Mishnah. You mess up the order. Okay? If, right? The other one wasn't you messed up the order. The other was you spilled the blood, and then you had to redo the order. But it's a similar kind of case. If you slaughtered the seir before you put the blood of the bull on the altar, remember what, sprinkle it in the Kodesh Kodeshim. Remember what's supposed to happen. You slaughter the bull. You take the bull, you sprinkle its blood, right? You do the vidoy. We're not going to talk about the vidoy. You do the ktoret, which was what we just discussed yesterday. That you take the handful of the incense, you burn it inside. Then you come back out. You take the blood of the bull, and then you bring it inside and start sprinkling it. Then you go back out and you start with the slaughtering of the goat. The goat's not slaughtered yet at this point. Then you bring the blood of the goat inside and sprinkle it inside. So it says here, well, it says, if you slaughtered the goat before you did the blood inside, you're supposed to do it after you do the blood of the bull. But if you slaughtered it beforehand, lo asava lo klum, no good. You have to start from the beginning. So Tanan, they say, but that doesn't seem to match our Mishnah. Because again, what does our Mishnah say? Hikdim dama seir l'dama pal. Our Mishnah said, if you do the blood of the goat before you do the blood of the bull, what do? You basically end up with 3 sets. You sprinkle the blood of the goat by accident first. So what do you have to do? You sprinkle the blood of the bull, and then you sprinkle the blood of the goat. This isn't a case where nishpach hadam and you have to reslaughter an animal. But what's the problem? According to this, you're now going to end up in a situation where you slaughter the goat. Obviously, you slaughter the goat already because you have the blood of the goat. You slaughter the goat before the bull, before you sprinkle the blood of the bull. And Ula just said that doesn't work. And here it just says, all you have to do is do the blood again of the goat. It doesn't say slaughter a new goat. So what do they answer, right? And then they say, if you're right, Ula, he should need to go back and slaughter a new goat because, again, he slaughtered the goat this time too early. So, Tirgama Ula b'matnot shebeichal. What does Ula say? That Mishnah, our Mishnah, when it said if you do the blood of the goat before the bull, you just redo the blood of the goat. That wasn't talking about the bloods inside the Kodesh Kodeshim. That was talking about the bloods inside the sanctuary. So let's set up the case. What did you do? You slaughtered the bull. Forget about the incense and all that and the vidoys. I'm skipping all that. But you slaughter the bull. You bring the blood of the bull inside. Then you sprinkle it. Then you sprinkle the goat's. Then you slaughter the goat. Then you sprinkle the goat's blood. That's all fine. Then you go outside to the sanctuary and accidentally, or maybe purposely, I don't know, but you sprinkle the blood of the goat. At this point, you have to do bull and then goat again. And then you wouldn't have to slaughter from the beginning because you've already done the right order in the first part. So he says the Mishnah must be talking about the matanot in the Heichal. I want to just talk about this word matanot. We talked about it before. There's 2 different types of things you do with the blood. One is you sprinkle it. There's actually more, but in Yom Kippur, you're either specifically with the blood of the bull and the blood of the goat, you're sprinkling the blood either toward the kaporet, toward the parochet, right, toward the floor almost, right, and toward the top of the altar. You also do matanot, which is placing the blood. That's with the finger, where we go in an up-down motion or down-up motion, right? Whether we go upwards or we go downwards. We saw both, right? Different opinions, which one's up, which one's down, but that's called placing. That's from the word latet, matana. Matana is a gift, but it's also latet, to give. So, or to place. So the word matanot and the word hazaot are 2 different things, but they're clearly used interchangeably here, because here they're talking about matanot in the Heichal, which could actually be the matanot on the altar, but it also could be the sprinkling. Okay, so we're going to see that the words are used somewhat interchangeably here. They're not necessarily always referring matanot to the placings on the 4 corners of the altar and the hazaot to the parochet and the kodesh kodeshim and all that. They're used interchangeably, but they really do mean different things. And then we have zrikat dam and shvichat dam, right? If you talk about other terminology used, which remember we had a whole question once, I forget now, is it shvicha includes zrika or does zrika include shvicha, right? There was a whole thing, is one include the other or not? Which one includes which? So those are all different words used for blood in the Beit HaMikdash. Also, Rabbi Afas said that the Mishnah was talking about in the Heichal and not in the Kodesh Kodeshim here when it gave this case that you just redo it, because you really just redo it without reslaughtering. If it had happened in Kodesh Kodeshim, you'd have to reslaughter because it would be out of order. Now we're going to go to this next section that we saw, that we have v'chein b'heichal, v'chein b'mizbeach. There was a machloket in our Mishnah. I want to go back to the Mishnah briefly. The Mishnah said, im ad shelo gamar matanot shebifnim nishpach hadam, right? You didn't finish doing the matanot in the Kodesh Kodeshim and the blood spills. Yavi dam acher v'yachzor b'tchila mibifnim. You go back to the beginning. V'chein b'heichal, v'chein b'mizbach hazahav shekulam kapara b'fnei atzmam. Each one is considered an independent unit. Today, we're going to learn what each unit comes to atone for, why they're considered separate units. Each one is a separate unit. So if the blood spills in the middle of any unit, you go back only to the beginning of that unit. You don't have to go back all the way to the beginning and start from the Kodesh Kodeshim. But Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon say, you don't go back to the beginning. Today, we're going to learn why they think that. You just continue from where you left off. So first, the Gemara is going to talk about each of those sections. And to do that, they bring a bright. Tanu Rabbanit. We're going to darshan this pasuk at the end of the section of Yom Kippur, pasuk Lamed Gimel in chapter 16 of Vayikra. I'll read you the whole pasuk first. V'chiper et mikdash hakodesh Okay, he atones for the Mikdash HaKodesh, which we're going to say is Kodesh Kodeshim. Vet Ol Moed is always the word for the sanctuary. Ve'et HaMizbeach, here you see the three sections that we just discussed, and the altar, Yechaper. Okay, so he atones for the Mikdash HaKodesh, the Ol Moed, Et HaMizbeach Yechaper. Notice that word Yechaper is unnecessary because it already said V'chipel, so you don't really need it to say again, atone. And then the second part of the verse talks about who. So the first is where, and the second is who. But we're going to see that, at least according to one interpretation, we're going to split this verse in half and say the first half is talking about one thing, second half is talking about something else. And notice the word yechaper comes up again. For the kohanim and for the whole nation, it will atone. Okay, it sounds like it's talking about the same thing, but we'll see. We're going to darshan something different. And again, that word yechaper is unnecessary. Every time it's unnecessary, we're going to learn something else from it. Tana Rabbanit. So the Braita says, "V'chiperet mikdash hakodesh ze lefanai v'lifnim." That's kodesh kodeshim. That's the holy of holies. Ol moed ze hechal. As I said, that's the sanctuary. Mizbeach kemashma'o. You don't need to explain that. That's obvious. That's the mizbeach, the altar. V'chiper, what is that? Elu azarot. Okay, the way Rashi understands this, and I'll already tell you somebody else, Tosfot disagrees, doesn't exactly explain it this way in others, but we'll go with Rashi's interpretation. What this means is that each section, each time you do the sprinklings, each one, and the problem with Rashi is there are no sprinklings in the Azara, so maybe you'd say the Shirayim, you could say, because the Azara is outside the sanctuary. But it's one of the issues with Rashi. But each part atones for something else. So when you do the blood, in the Kodesh Kodeshim, it atones for, what does it atone for? Any kind of tumah that took place, like if somebody went into the Kodesh Kodeshim when they were tamei by accident. When you get to the next one, right? When you get to the Hechal, it's in case somebody went into the sanctuary and did something there tamei, or brought something tamei inside, or they were tamei. And when you talk about the Mizbeach, it's someone did something on the altar that they were tamei, or they put something on that was impure. So it's all related, or someone came into the Azara with impurity. It's all relating to some sin that was related to impurity in the temple. Now you might think, what, this is what the Seir and the Par are coming to atone for? Like, why is that so important? So first of all, it was clearly very important. Okay, we're in Rosh Chodesh now. One of the things we bring on Rosh Chodesh is the Seir Yizim L'Chatat. And the reason they bring a series in L'Chatat and you bring it on all the holidays is exactly for this reason, which makes sense. There's also a Seir that they're bringing. It's to atone for any kind of mess up in the temple that had to do with impurity. As you know, it was a very central theme. It comes up all the time. That's very serious if somebody brings something tamei into the temple or it comes in when they're tamei. So there's special korban just for that. And here we're going to see each sprinkling atones for a different section, right? You thought this was all coming to atone for the sins of the people. No, not really. Okay. What's atoning for the sins of the people? Now we get to the second half of the verse. Second half of the verse, according to this interpretation, we're going to see there's a debate about this, but we won't see this till the end of the sentence here. But this is Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is now talking about the Seir HaMishtalech. Remember this, the scapegoat. The scapegoat is the one that atones for all our sins. And you get to that much more in the next parah. We're going to learn all about the scapegoat. So now they say, Kohanim, Kemashman. We know what Kohanim are. That's for the Kohanim. Ama Kahal Elu Yisrael. That's the Israelim. Who's left? Well, the Levites. So Yechaper, that extra word Yechaper, Elu HaLevim. Hushvu Kulam Kapara Achat. Now they say, it says a Kohanim v'Ama Kahal Yechaper. That means they're all together. Now, how are they all together? Didn't they wasn't the par for the Kohanim and the goat, right? The bull was for the Kohen and the goat was for the people. Yes, that's true. And that's all when it comes to some sort of impurity in the temple. But when it comes to the rest of the sins, they're all together. They all get atonement for all other sins, everything that's not Tumah Mikdash v'Kodashah, for everything that doesn't have to do with impurity in the temple. That's all the Seir HaMishtalech, and everyone gets atonement for that together, including meaning the Seir HaMishtalech is for the Kohanim. Okay, you might have thought maybe it's just for everyone else, and they're all dealt with the par. No, the par was all the other stuff, right? The Tumah in the temple. But the Seir HaMishtalech is for everyone together. But Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon omer, Kashem shedam ha'seir na'asa b'fnim mechaper al Yisrael b'tumat mikdash v'kodashav, So first he says the same thing, really. He just says it in different words, which is just like the blood of the Shiur takes care of all the impurity in the temple in all the different areas, like for the people, for the Jew, for everyone who's not Kohanim. Likewise, the bull, in other words, you have the bull for the Kohen and the Shiur, the goat for the people. They do the same thing, and that's why everything about them is parallel, because you do that, right? The sprinklings for the Kohanim and the sprinklings for the people. But here comes where he differs. He differs about the Shiur Mishtalech. Now, what's the problem? Shiur Mishtalech is mechaper, it atones. What's the problem? Usually the blood provides atonement, but there's no blood because you don't slaughter it. So what about the Shiur Mishtalech atones? It must be the vidoy, the confession. If you remember, the Kohen does 3 confessions. He does 2 on the bull, 1 for himself and his family, and 1 for all the Kohanim. So they're now going to say, what provides atonement for the Jewish people from the Shiur Mishtalech? It's the vidoy, the confession. So therefore, let's make that comparison to the Kohanim. According to him, the par splits into 2. There's the blood of the par, the bull, that atones for the Kohanim with any kind of sin they had to do with Tumana Mikdash v'Kodashav, which, by the way, now we can understand why the Kohanim were dealt with in a different way. You might have thought, we actually didn't discuss this, but why is there a separate offering for Kohanim than there are for everybody else? If you say that those offerings are going for Tum'ana Mikdash v'Kodashav, then it makes perfect sense that they have their own offering, because they're the ones who are mainly dealing with temple-related things. They might need their own sacrifice for it, because the atonement that they need is different from the atonement that people who barely ever go into the temple need, right? It's just, I don't know if it's different, but quantitatively for sure it's different. I don't know if qualitatively it's different. Something to think about. So now we say here, so just like that, the vidoy is what atones. So the par splits into 2. There's the blood and there's the confession. The confession part of the bull offering is for the Kohanim and all their sins. So the Shiur Mishtalech, according to Rabbi Shimon, doesn't have to do with the Kohanim at all. They're excluded from the Shiur Mishtalech because they have their own special korban, and it's the vidoy of it which provides atonement. So the confession provides atonement, as does the sprinkling of the blood, each for different things. The main point of which we brought this for was to show that each section, that when you do it on the inside the Kodesh Kodashim, you're focusing on anything that happened inside the Kodesh Kodashim. When you're in the sanctuary, anything that happened in the sanctuary. When you're by the altar, anything on the altar. Right? Each one comes for something else, and that's why we see that each are a different set. Tanu Rabbanan, another Braita, another pasuk, which is actually very similar. We saw this pasuk yesterday. It's pasuk Kaf in that same chapter. V'chila michaper hakodesh. Remember we said im kiper kila, im kiper kila, im kila kiper. Right? It was 2 ways of reading it. But basically, let's go back to the simple reading. He finishes to atone for the kodesh. Ve'et ol moed ve'et hamizbech. Same exact separation here. The kodesh, the ol moed, and the mizbech. So v'chila michaper et hakodesh ze lefanai v'lifnim. That's the kodesh kodashim. Ol moed ze hechal. That's the sanctuary. Mizbech kemashmao. That's the altar. Milamed shekulan kapara b'fnei atzman. It teaches you that each one is its own separate unit. And now, okay, this is a classic midrash halacha as opposed to Mishnah. Our Mishnah just said the halacha. What you do if, right? If the blood spills in the middle, this is what you do. This starts, and it didn't connect it to the verse at all. This starts off with the verse and says, from this verse, we're going to get to the halacha. And now they're going to go much more in depth into the halacha that we saw in the Mishnah. And they're going to give a number of different examples. This is very simple because it's just review of what we saw in the Mishnah yesterday. Mikan amru, so from here, the fact that they separate these 3 areas into 3 separate sections, when it talks about atonement, it means that each section atones for somewhat different. And therefore, if you were in the middle of placing the blood, this is where I said they use the word interchangeably. It's really sprinkling the blood, not placing the blood. But if you're in the middle of sprinkling the blood inside the Kodesh Kodashim, and the blood spills, you start that whole step from the beginning. Again, we're going to see Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon disagree. Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Shimon omrim eino matchil ela mimakom shepasak. This is what we saw in the Mishnah. Right? You start from where you left off. You were at number 3, so you did 3 already. You continue from there and you do 4, 5, 6, 7. Right? And then you did 1 up, and then you started your 7 down. You spilled in the middle. You start from where you left off. If you finish that whole set, and then the blood spills in between there and going to the next set. This everyone agrees with. You basically start where you're up to because you don't have to go back because you finished that set because they're each independent units. If you were in the middle, though, of the ones that you were spraying toward the parochet, so you bring new blood and you start again in that section only. You start where you left off. Again, you're in between set 2 and 3. And the blood spills. So again, so you start from there, according to everybody. But you start putting the dam on the altar, and then the blood spills. Okay, this is really very easy because it's the exact same concept. We're just applying it to each case. They're spelling it out. And then you start with that set. No, you stop, you just continue from wherever you were at. Soon we're going to find out why they hold this way, okay? If you finished all those sprinklings and the placements, now what's left? You're supposed to pour the extra, the shirayim, at the base of the altar. So what if you finished, you didn't do the shirayim yet, the extra left, the remainder. Everybody agrees that it's fine. You don't have to start, you don't have to re-slaughter another animal in order to get blood for that's just the remainder. It's not critical. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan is going to explain the root of their machloket. They both darshan the same verse. Midam chatata kippurim achat b'shana. We saw this before, right? Chiper Aaron al karnotav achat b'shana. He does atonement on the karnot mizbeach. Last time we darshan the beginning part of that pasuk once a year. Midam chatata kippurim achat b'shana. Okay, it says it again once a year. So now they're going to say, what does it mean? From the dam of the sin offering of Yom Kippur once. So they're going to connect this sin offering and once. Each one is going to do it a different way. Rabbi Meir, who now we're going to understand was Tanakama, Chachamim. Rabbi Meir savar chatat achat amarti lecha velo shte chataot. Meaning, you can do one atonement, okay? Meaning, you can't do, Rashi says it, velo la'asot kapara achat mishte be'emot. You need to do one atonement. That means one unit from one animal. You can't have 3 sprinklings were done with one and 4 with another. No, that's not one chatat. You need one animal to do the sprinklings. Now, we don't care if it's within a unit. That's okay. You can have one for this unit, one for that unit, but each unit has to be done with one animal. The way I'd like to say it is like this. It's a privilege to be able to sprinkle blood on the altar, right? We were commanded that we can do this, but it's a privilege. You can't just do extra. God said you're allowed to do this. You're allowed to do what God said. 7, let's say, or right, 1 and 7, whatever it is. It's the amount that God said you're allowed to do. You can't start. So if you do 3 and then the blood spills and then you start from the beginning again, you end up doing 10 instead of 7. That's not what God said. There's one chitoy. Chitoy means to, really in Hebrew, it's like to disinfect. What it means is to purify, right? You're purifying things by atoning for impurity. So you're allowed to do that only once. You can't do that extra times. So therefore, that's how they understand chatat achad. That's why you continue from where you left off. So now the issue becomes, right? They're basically saying you're not allowed to do more than what God said, okay? Or what the Torah tells you. Tanya, we'll get back to this concept soon. Tanya Amar Rebbe, li chilek Rabbi Yaakov belugi. Now we're moving to a different topic connected to this. We're going to talk about the mitzorah, the leper's process. So the leper has a bunch of things he needs to do. The ones we're going to focus on now are he's supposed to take one of the kvasim, sacrifice it, wave it together with a log, which is a measurement, liquid measurement, a volume of oil, and he waves them together. Then he takes the oil, he sprinkles it toward the parochet, like in Yom Kippur, right? Not the Kodesh Kodeshim, but in the Hechal. Then he takes the oil. Okay, these are on your sheet. You can look at it. He takes the extra oil, whatever's left. He goes to the mitzorah, who's, remember, outside Shar Nikanor. He stands by there with his right ear and his right finger and his right toe, and he puts the oil on the mitzorahs, on the leper's right ear, right finger, right toe. Then he takes whatever's left and he rubs it on his head, on the head of the mitzorah. Okay, basically like rubs whatever's left on his hands because he puts the oil in his hands. Whatever's left, he rubs on the head of the mitzvah. So now, according to Rabbi Yaakov distinguished. Chilek means he distinguished. He distinguished with Logan. We again have a set of sprinklings, a set of placements, right, on the ear, on the finger and that, and on the head. So he says, when Rabbi Yaakov talked about the log, he distinguished. He said it wasn't like this halacha. Okay, how so? Right? So Rashi says, what does he mean by this? That in that case, we'd say, okay, if Rabbi Lazar or Rabbi Shimon, I'm looking at Rashi, Rabbi Yaakov belogin, Lina tam Rabbi Yaakov chiluk belog shem and shemitzora, shelo hushvu l'matan damim, they're not identical. Vishinali lo nechleku Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon b'avodot hachalukot bo, sheva zaot shebifnim matan behonot, right? Because there's 7 sprinklings and placements. Tilo amrina mimakom shepasaku matchil. Rashi says, in what way do they not disagree? They have to agree with one side or the other. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon don't think you pick up from where you left off. You start from the beginning. Okay. Why do you have to start from the beginning? Because it has to be waved together with it. Okay. Because it says log echad shemen, log echad amarti l'chaliot kapara v'lo shnei lugim. It has to be from one. So therefore, you would there you can't say the same thing as there. Okay. Anyway, he says they don't disagree. However, there's a big problem with this. Velo, really? They don't disagree there? Vahatanya, I'm going to show you right where they explicitly disagree. You did some of the sprinklings of the oil inside the Kodesh, inside the sanctuary. And the oil spills. You start from the beginning. There you have it. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon omrim, mimakom shepasaku matchil. And they say exactly as they said by Yom Kippur. You start where you left off from. So what do you mean they don't disagree? Sounds like what do you mean they agree? They clearly disagree here. Let's keep going. Again, this is just, the same idea over and over. Gamar matanot shebeichal. He finished in the sanctuary, v'nishpach halog, and then it spills. He starts the next set. That's fine. He brings new oil, starts the next set. He's in the middle of doing it. Let's say he puts it on the guy's ear, but he didn't get yet to his finger. You start that set from the beginning. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon again come in and say, likewise, he finishes that set before he puts on the guy's head. Remember, he wipes it on the guy's head. At this point, just like in the previous, that's just the remainder. It's not critical. You don't have to bring new oil. So basically, we're stuck with a problem. How did Rebbe say that Rabbi Yaakov didn't distinguish between the cases, and they don't disagree here? They seem to clearly disagree. Ema lishana Rabbi Yaakov belukin. Not lichilek, he distinguished. No, he repeated. In other words, he said it's the exact same machloka by Logan. It was a mistake. What we said, Rebbe said. Rebbe obviously said the opposite of what we thought he said. Amar, now we're going to learn about this matnot harosh ema akbot. The last part about rubbing the extra on the guy's head it's not essential. My time. If you want to say, remember, that's going to reject it. If you're going to say, because it says v'hanotar min hashemen, whatever's left, which means this is called remainder. Remainders are always not so significant, but that's not true. But it says that whatever's left from the mincha, now this is a separate halakha. We talked about this a bunch of times recently. The kmitza, remember, you take the dough for the mincha offering, you put your fingers inside, you take out a kmitza, a kometz, you put it in a bowl, you sanctify it, right? You have some frankincense, we're not going to talk about that part, and oil. Then you take it and you burn it on the altar. And the shirayim, whatever's left, goes to the kohanim to eat. Now they say there have to be shirayim. We actually saw this halacha. If there's no shirayim, you can't burn the kometz can't burn the kmitza on the altar. So it seems here, something that's noteret, says noteret min hamincha, the same word, remainder, is essential because you can't burn the kometz if you have no remainder. There has to be that you took it out of something. If, let's say, all you have is a kmitza and there was no remainder, or the remainders got lost, right? You can't burn it when you don't have the remainder in front of you. So there, it's not ma'akev. So what do they say? It is ma'akev, right? And here it's not. So they say, there's 2 terms that relate to it. One says umiyeter, from the remainder, and v'hanotal, and the remainder. Because it says it twice, it shows it's lakev. We've seen this many times. Anything repeated shows it's essential. That's why. There it's essential, here it's not. So we actually don't reject it. In the end, they say it is clearly the remainder and not so important because it says v'hanotal, calls it the remainder. Amal Rabbi Yochanan. Another halacha of Rabbi Yochanan about the Asha Mitzorah. Since we're on the Asha Mitzorah, we're now going to divert our attention to the Asha Mitzorah. This is the korban he brings with a bunch of other korbanot, but this one, if you took the Asha Mitzorah, shachato shelo lishma, again, we have a bit of a problem, Rashi and the other commentaries. Rashi takes this literally. Some people say it's actually not talking about shchita shelo lishma because that has nothing to do with our topic, but we'll explain according to Rashi how he connects them because they're not, it's not the same. They're going to compare it to nishpach hadam. Now, the blood spilling. They're both mess ups of a korban. One is the blood spills before you put it on the altar, and did what you're supposed to do. And one is that you slaughter it with the wrong intent. You take the animal, and instead of slaughtering it for a korban asham, you say, I'm slaughtering it for korban ola or something else. Okay, you have the wrong intent when you're doing the korban. Now, if you recall, a chatat and a pesach that you do shelo lishma are disqualified entirely. Any other sacrifice, and can't be brought on the altar at all. Any other sacrifice, like an asham, for example, if you do it shelo lishma, you can't. If you bring it, it's not going to count for what it's supposed to count for, this Asha Mitzorah. However, you do sacrifice it on the altar. It's not disqualified. It's not pasul, as they say. You're supposed to bring it on the altar anyway. You sacrifice it. You basically go through the motions. You do everything you're supposed to do with it. You bring the sachim along with it, the libations that go along with it. We're going to see that inside. You basically go along, but it doesn't count for the obligation. So Asha Mitzorah sheshachato shelo lishma banu lemachloket Rabbi Meir v'Elazar Rabbi Shimon. It's the same argument. That's what he says, Rabbi Yochanan. How so? Rabbi Meir da amar yavi acher v'yatchil b'tchila hachanami yavi acher v'yishchot. According to Rabbi Meir, you start from the beginning, right? In this case, there is no midpoint to pick up from, right, where there were sections. So you start from the beginning and you do it again. In other words, now here we're going to focus on a different element of their machloket, which we saw from the drasha. According to Rabbi Meir, we don't care if you repeat something you already did. So fine, you slaughtered it already. What's the difference? You slaughter another one in its place and you do that. But so hachanami, you'll bring a new one and yishchot. Ula Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, shomrim, imakom shapasak mishamu matchil. Meaning, remember, chitoyecha v'lo shnei chituyim. You can't do it twice. So now we're stuck. You can't slaughter two korbanot for an asham, even though you messed it up. You actually can't do two for one korban. So therefore, we're going to say, hacha ein lo takana. In other words, theoretically, since he can't bring two animals for the same sacrifice, just like he couldn't do a repeat of the sprinklings of the blood, he can't do a repeat of the shchita, so he's stuck. There's no way that he can fulfill his obligation for Asha Mitzorah. Very interesting, right? This is the whole concept of, in general, we always believe that there's always ways to fix things. You can always improve. You can always fix something. There's always some way to do it. This comes out and says, no. Sometimes you get into a situation where there's no resolution and you're stuck. So if you were to do it shelo lishma, you're stuck. Okay. Now, matkifla Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, what do you mean? What do you mean? Baha otoktiv. It says you bring it. Okay. So otoktiv would sound like everyone should agree, even Rabbi Meir, that it's only one. And you can't possibly bring two behemot for one korban hasham. And even Rabbi Meir should agree with Rabbi Shimon in this case. So they say, kasha, it's in fact difficult. Rav Chisda raised this question. Rabbi Yochanan, it's in fact difficult. However, the Gemara now goes and says, well, we're going to bring a braita, Tanya Kabateta, Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to bring a braita that actually proves Rabbi Yochanan. You said you had a difficulty with it. I'm going to prove Rabbi Yochanan from a braita. Asha Mitzorah, sheshachato shelo lishmo. Here's our case. You slaughter this Asha Mitzorah, shelo lishmo, for the wrong intent. Oh, shelo natam midamo legabe behonot, or let's say you didn't bring its blood for the behonot, and now you have no blood left, so you're going to need blood to put on the ear and the finger and the toe. Hareze ole legabe mizbeach. Okay, remember we learned this. This is what I told you before. The one that he messed up or didn't finish doing the work with still goes on the altar. V'ta'un nisachim, and you have to bring libations with it. And sarich asham acher lahachshiro, and you need to bring another asham in order for the person to fulfill their obligation. So in other words, you go ahead with all the motions of this one, But in the end, you have to bring a new korban asham. Okay, so that seems to prove Rabbi Yochanan. That somebody holds you bring a new korban asham, it must be Rabbi Meir. Therefore, he does disagree with Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon. But Rav Chisda, who disagreed with Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Lecha, he could say, okay, he could read this in a different way. Might tzarich, when it says, and this is a fascinating mahalach, fascinating way of thinking. When it says you need to bring another asham machshiro, how do we understand it? You need to bring a new one, meaning bring a new one. He says, tzarich ve'en lo takana. You need to bring a new one, meaning you don't fulfill your obligation with that first one. But sorry, there's nothing you can do. You can't possibly bring 2 korbanot asham for one thing you did, for one leper. So therefore, you're stuck. Tzarich means tzarich, you need to, but no can do. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. If tzarich meant tzarich ve'en lo takana, then tane tana tzarich ve'en lo takana. The Braita should have said that explicitly so that we would know that that's what it meant. It shouldn't say you need to, and people might misconstrue and think it means you need to, but can't. So therefore, it seems very strange. So the Gemara says, that doesn't bother me. I'll show you another case where it says tzarich, and it means ein lo takana. You can't do it. You need to, but you can't. Here's an interesting case. In v'hatnan, yes, in fact, that could be the case. It says you need, and it means you need, but you can't. It should be v'hatnan, not v'hatanya. It says in a Mishnah, nazir memorat. If you have a bald nazir, okay, what if the nazir is bald? He has no hair. Now, one of the processes in the nazir is you're supposed to shave your head. Now, you can't shave your head if you're bald. You have no hair to shave. So, Beit Shammai omrim tzarich havarat ta'al. You need to put the razor over his head. Now, what do you mean? He doesn't have any hair. So we're going to understand need means, this could be a case where it says need means you need to, but you can't, and there's nothing you can do. In other words, you're stuck. This nazir can't complete the process of his nazirut because he can't put the razor on his head. Ubeit Hillel omrim ein tzarich havarat Torah. You don't need to do it. You just, in this case, he doesn't have hair, so you skip that part of the process. Ba'amar Rabbi Avina, and here comes the explanation of Beit Shammai. Kisha omrim Beit Shammai tzarich ve'en lo takana. That's the way Rabbi Avina understands this Mishnah. Need means need, but can't be fixed. Okay, that's how he understands Beit Shammai. And then that would match what we said before about whether they disagree or not, right? That tzarich means tzarich. That Braita then wouldn't prove Rabbi Yochanan. This is the way Rav Chisda read. But that Mishnah there, when Beit Shammai said tzarich, there's a debate about it. Pliga de Rabbi Padat. Rabbi Padat doesn't understand the Mishnah in that way. How does he understand it? What's the other option? You do the motions, even though it doesn't mean anything, right? So, Ta'amar Rabbi Padat, Beit Shammai v'Rabbi Elazar amru davar echad. He said that Beit Shammai and Rabbi Elazar, in some other case, have the same, right? This comes up a lot of times where we take different opinions in different places and we say they're really one and the same. So now we're going to see how he understands Beit Shammai from Rabbi Elazar's position in something else. Beit Shammai had amaran. So we're going to explain again. I'm going to tell you this from the beginning. What it means is tzarich means you need to pass a razor over his head, meaning even though it has no meaning, he doesn't have any hair, you still do the motions. You put the razor over his head. Okay, he has no hair. What's the difference? How do we know this? Because what he said is Beit Shammai and Rabbi Elazar said the same thing. Now we're back to our case of the Mitzorah, the leper. Rabbi Elazar, Ditanya, it says in a Braita, Ein lo bohen yad u bohen regel. If you don't have a bohen yad or a bohen regel, actually, I think this is where it's supposed to be a Mishnah, and the other one was a Braita. I think it was my mistake. I'm not sure. Anyway, there's some confusion about which one's a Mishnah, which one's a Braita. You can look it up. I don't see it now in front of me. But Ditanya, as it says, Ein lo bohen yad u bohen regel. What if, okay, you're supposed to put the oil and the blood on the finger and the toe, the right finger, the right toe, and the right ear. What if he doesn't have? What if he doesn't have a bohen yad or a bohen regel? Okay, then ein lo tara olamit. You can't do the leper process. He can't do it ever. That's not Rabbi Elazar. That's what we said before. It's like you need to and you can't and you're stuck. But Rabbi Elazar omer, and here's what we're looking for, noten al mekomo v'yotzei. You put it on the stump where he should have a finger. You put it where his finger should be, where his toe should be. You again, you can't really put it on his finger because he doesn't have a finger, so you do what's second best, okay? Likewise, when it comes to, and this is where Beit Shammai says, you put the razor over his head even though he doesn't have any hair. So that's how we see that Rabbi Padat disagrees with the tzarich there. And then in that case, according to Rabbi Padat, there is no proof for what Rav Chisda said, that tzarich meant really he has to bring a new korban hasham. And that would match the fact that Rabbi Meir does disagree with Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon also there. Rabbi Shimon Omer, by the way, now we're just finishing that source. Rabbi Shimon gives a third option. Im natan al shel smol yatsa. If he doesn't have fingers on the right hand, so he puts another finger on the left hand. Okay, you can just do it on the left, right? Better to do it on the right, but if you don't have right, do it on the left. So that's another solution. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're going to talk about a different issue that has to do with the Mitzorah, and then we'll come back with one small thing to finish up about our Mishnah, going back to the Mishnah, our Mishnah, but here we're still in the Mitzorah. It says that the Mitzorah collects the blood. Now, they collect the blood. What do they do with the blood? So one thing they do is they put it on the altar, and another thing they do with the blood is put it on the ear and the finger and the nose and the toe of the leper. So now they say, "V'lakach midam ha'asham." Okay, this is when he comes and he takes the blood from the asham. V'natana kohen al tznuch ozen hamitahil. Now it comes clear elsewhere that when he puts it on the ear, he puts it with his finger, just like we saw on the altar. When he puts it with his finger on the altar, the blood on the altar. So also here he uses his finger. So when it says v'lakach v'natan, he takes and he puts. So they connect them and they say like this. Yachol b'kli, you might have thought lakach, how does he take the blood? He puts it in a vessel, just like when he collects the blood, usually from the slaughter, you put it in a vessel and you carry that to the altar and you put it on the altar. So likewise, the blood he collects for the purpose of putting it on the leper, you would think also has to be put into a kli, utensil. Talmud lomar v'natan, manitina b'atzmo shel kohen, af l'kicha b'atzmo shel kohen. Just like you place it, those two verbs come one right after the other. Just like it's placed with his finger, you accept it in his finger, meaning in his hand. He collects it in his hand. He actually has to do something strange. Collects the blood in his right hand because Kabbalah is always in your right. But then he has to do the finger, dip the finger into the blood with his right hand. So what does he do? He puts the blood into his left hand and then dips his finger with his right into the left. If you talk about difficult actions for a Kohen, it's funny this one's not mentioned. You'd think this would be a little difficult. Keep the blood in his hand, pour it into his other hand, and then start dipping his finger. Right? Forget about all the blood that falls on the floor that we keep seeing in the backdrop here. Anyway, that's how he does it. Yachol aflim is bachken. So wait, if you're collecting the blood from this korban hasham in his hand, maybe also the blood that he collects for the altar. In other words, it's all collected at the same time from the slaughter. So you might have thought also that gets collected in his hand. No, but there's this pasuk that compares the asham is like the sin offering. And just like matu, chatatu unakli, all sin offerings, you put the blood in a utensil. Af asham ta'unkli. So nimtzet ataumel, from here we learn how did the asham mitzorah work. Now getting into practicality. Shnei kohanim mekablim et damo. Echad biyad ve'echad bikli. We have two kohanim that stand there when the slaughter happens. One collects it in a kli, one in his hand. And so the one with the vessel goes to the altar to sprinkle it there. They kind of happen simultaneously. One goes one way, one goes the other. I don't know if they happen exactly at the same time, but basically they're not performed by the same person. Last thing for today, we were talking in the Mishnah about what happens if the blood spills, and then you need to start slaughtering a new animal and start from scratch. So now, or start from wherever you ended. At this point, you're going to end up, let's say it was the par. You slaughtered the par, and now you spilled the blood, you have to slaughter a new par. Let's say you spill it again, you have to slaughter a third par. So now that was all we discussed in the beginning of class. Now you end up with a bunch of parim that were all used. You're supposed to burn, they're called the parim anisrafim. They're supposed to be burnt in the Beit HaDeshen. So the question is, which one? All of them? One of them? What do we do? So Tnanatam, now this says it's in a Mishnah, it's actually a Brata, it's not a Mishnah. It should say Tanu Rabbanan or something like that. There's two things that are true about the par. One is it has to be burnt in the Beit HaDeshen, which is outside the Machaneh Yisrael, which is the borders of Jerusalem. It's considered halachic Jerusalem then. And there's a whole debate about which side, on the east, on the north. There's a whole debate about that, not to get into now. And it makes the Kohen who is dealing with it, he has to purify his clothes. His clothes become tameh. So all of the animals, everyone whose blood was sprinkled, all these apply to him. Divrei Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. V'chachamim omrim ein metamim b'gadim ve'ein nischafin b'Beit HaDeshen ela ha'acharon ho'il v'gamar bo kapara. According to the rabbis, it's only the last one, and this we'll get into a whole discussion tomorrow about when there's different parts of the process, right? What's the important part? Starting it finishing it, right? If you didn't finish it, you wouldn't have received atonement. So therefore, it must be the one that you use last, that you finish the atonement with, that the last blood was sprinkled from that animal. That's the one you use, and not all of them. Okay, I'm going to just raise a question for you to think about. Is there a connection between this machloket and the other machloket we saw today, to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis, and Rabbi Meir, really? You can try to think. I haven't thought of a connection yet, but I wondered if they're connected with each other. Okay, so with that, I'll leave you. Have a Shabbat Shalom, a Chodesh Tov, and we'll meet back up together on Sunday, online already. Later on, I'll put up tomorrow's stuff.